All right. So as I mentioned, Steve Smith's going to start us off just with a few comments here from the family, and then he's going to hand it back to me, and we will walk through kind of our discussion this evening, purpose of the meeting, and go from there. Let me turn this over here to Steve.
Well, welcome. I feel like we ought to have a national anthem or a Pledge of Allegiance, but I appreciate you taking your time to let us share our vision. I'm Steve Smith, one of the Smith family, along with Reese and our two sons that run Howery and Smith. And give you, I don't want to bore you, but give you a little of our background. And that is our company was founded in 1954. So we've been in business 70 years. Um, We've been in business 70 years and we've been developing and building in Franklin for more than 50 years. And like I say, I appreciate you taking the time. We've owned this property for plus or minus 50 years, and we've developed communities larger than this and lots of them smaller. But it's an unusual circumstance that the developer is the owner of the property or has owned the property for any length of time. So we live in Williamson County, Franklin, have most of our lives, and we appreciate you being on and taking your time, and look forward to answering your question and delivering a neighborhood that we'll all be proud of years from now. So thank you very much. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Hines, who's our planner and is going to answer most or all the questions tonight. Thank you.
All right, folks. So I'm back with you. I am Jeff Hines with Catalyst Design Group. For those of you that don't recognize me, but I've been working kind of with the Smiths on this property for quite a few years. Um, Let me make sure my screen sharing is not paused. And okay, Stormy, can you see my screen? Let me make sure of that. Since technology is a wonderful thing when it works.
Or when we learn how to work it.
Or when we well,
Hey Jeff, I can see it.
okay. All right, good to know. So this evening, we're going to run through a little bit about the purpose of what we're here to do tonight. This meeting is part of the process when an application comes into Envision Franklin to amend the plan, the long range plan for the city. So what we want to do, or the purpose of tonight, is to have a dialogue with all the folks that are on here, to let you ask questions. And our goal for tonight is basically that everybody walks away with a better understanding of this proposal at the end of the evening. Well, now, okay, housekeeping rules. Didn't want to jump to that screen for a minute. We're going to save the questions until after the presentation, but we have
Hey
some.
Jeff, it's not changing on our screen. It still says meeting purpose.
Okay, good to know. Oh, that changed, Stormy?
No, it did not. It says the screen share is paused.
Yeah, that's what I think I want that right there.
Might hit resume next.
There
I
we
can
go.
see it now.
All right, good deal. So as I mentioned, we're going to save questions to the end, but certainly we are monitoring the chat feature. So please feel free to type questions into that as we go through if you have questions right that moment. And then we'll keep track of those and come to you and kind of unmute individual by individual, let you ask a question, or if you type it in chat, we can ask it. I think what we're trying to do is kind of organize the questions, asking them one at a time, and have a good, respectful discussion tonight where we don't have folks trying to talk over other folks. I think I will say this isn't the forum for kind of long statements or opinions, since that's only going to hurt folks that may have questions, and we do have a limited time this evening. So request, everyone's assistance in kind of honoring that. We want to get as many questions answered tonight as we can.
Barb in chat asks what other properties the Smith family has developed in Williamson County.
I'll tell you what, let's keep that one to the end and keep track of that. Well, my screen doesn't want to change. I think that's the all right. Plan B. Let me log back in and share again. I apologize for this because we were working fine a half an hour ago and I checked all this out. So, yeah. All right, let's do it this way. Tell me over there if you,
I can see your screen.
yeah, but problem is okay. All right, I think we got it. Even though I'm window-wise, I'm not full screen here, but we'll make it work. All right, what is Envision Franklin, which is what we're here to talk about tonight? 3 points here that I know the staff at planning kind of wanted to make points on. That Envision Franklin provides guidance on future development within the city. It has design concepts, and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission is who maintains this document. It was last updated in 2024, the summer of that, and a little bit about the property, the Smith family properties, which is about 495 rough acres, is that during the update, there was a lot of discussion, and the recommendation from the consultant at the time was for village green on this property. However, it was changed at the Planning Commission on the floor and was approved with rural reserve, and we'll talk more about what that means here. The property is currently in the county, and is zoned MGA 1, which, because it's in the urban growth boundary of the city of Franklin, which means it is a boundary that the city, about 15 years ago plus, established working with Williamson County as far as their growth limits. And areas that are properties within the county that are within that area have the MGA 1, which is basically 1 acre lot zoning applied to it. Yep, I think we have a few more people, so I'm going to admit a few more here. All right, welcome to those that are just joining right now. Um, we kind of dove in already, but you folks will take questions at the end. We're still at the beginning, so you haven't missed that much. We had some technical difficulties thanks to me. So process discussion tonight is the neighborhood meeting that you see shared there. Where does this go from here? There will be a city staff review and a recommendation that comes out on the 18th of June. And then the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission will hold a public hearing and a formal vote on the 26th of June. And if the plan amendment is adopted at that meeting, the next step would be finalization of annexation of this property into the city and submittal of a development plan. And both those steps would have additional both planning commission and BOMA meetings and public hearings associated with them. So site location. We'll start here just to make sure. I think everybody on this call may know where we're talking about, but here is Highway 96, which now is in place, 4-lane median divided highway. This is Wilson Pike and then Trinity Road right here. And this bend you probably recognize well. Fly Park is right there. The school is right here, Trinity Elementary. North Chapel Road running here. You can see my cursor. So what has changed now versus a year ago is 96 is now in place. And what we believe and have presented as part of this request is that what is appropriate with that highway now in place is a transition of land uses with some little more intensity of the type of uses along Highway 96, transitioning to less intense uses as you move further away from Highway 96. And we also have, which we'll show in a minute, we have a commercial node here at the intersection of North Chapel Road that's in the current planning policy for neighborhood commercial. And that would be more service commercial that provides everyday services, whether it's some food service, dry cleaner, you know, smaller grocery, those types of uses that people go to and hop in their car and currently drive into Carruthers or even into the city to seek is that this node right here at North Chapel is an appropriate place to have some of those services so that trips onto Highway 96 stay more localized and therefore, help traffic conditions further in toward the city. I think the one that all folks probably come to mind is right at I-65 and Highway 96. So that's a little bit of this. The guiding principle for this and the Smith family, I think Steve didn't say it this evening, but we've said it all along, is that this is a legacy development. The vision for the family is that a mixed residential community offering a variety of price points of homes from starter homes and townhomes to larger single family residences and providing a multi-generational housing wherein families can stay together. I think an acronym is kind of aging in place, which allows families to stay connected. And you'll hear that discussed as we get into the site plan here. Um, the master plan here accommodates the independent and assisted living um, as part of it. So therefore, kind of fulfilling that niche for multi-generational housing. And the node at the intersection serves a role, the commercial node, the neighborhood commercial, to create a community wherein access to that commercial can be made by trails and golf cart pathways where not everybody hops into a car to fulfill some of their daily needs, as well as recreational points. So that's kind of part of the guiding principle for this. We also are studying at the request of city planning, even having a trail connection over to Trinity Elementary for the families that would reside here. So current land use policy, there are more folks, and let me admit, yeah. Um, Going back to admit everyone.
Bottom right, bottom. Click again. No.
Yeah. All right, some new folks coming in. Pick back up in the conversation. So the policy today on this property, pull this over here, is rural reserve. You see in this green notation. The area in darker green is conservation policy, which is basically the floodplain of Mays Creek as it runs kind of through the heart of the property. The The policy that we are seeking is Village Green policy, which is this darker green here, still have the conservation policy here. And then the red area here is that neighborhood commercial policy that currently exists at the intersection of North Chapel Road. What are the differences between rural reserve and village green? Rural reserve allows basically single family residential lots and also an institutional use, which is a little bit varied, but primarily single family residential lots with half acre minimum size, and 50% of a site must be preserved under that policy. The village green policy that we are seeking requires you to maintain 70% of the site in open space. Only 10 of that can be kind of programmed or open space within the community. 60% of the site acreage is required to be natural area that's preserved, which is a total of about 332 of the 495 acres here. The village green allows for the single family residential we mentioned, duplexes, townhomes, farmstead residential, which we'll talk a little bit about, small scale multifamily, and live work, as well as the institutional. So uh, the assisted living and independent living that we are seeking would be an example of that institutional type use. So what I put on the screen for you to realize here is the areas of the site that would be preserved versus what would be developed. This lighter tan, very light green color is the proposal of what would be developed. Everything in the green color would remain natural, meaning undisturbed, except for mowing meadows and pastures, and um, you know that's pretty much it. One thing that this proposal does is it allows for the development to occur on the flatter areas of the site, which are currently open meadows for the most part. And you can see we're preserving all the tree cover up here on the northern side. We're preserving tree rows down through here. There are some trees here. That's that neighborhood commercial node there and there on that corner. But this is preserved in open space down here. Mays Creek runs right along the heart of this. This property boundary is the center line of Mays Creek. And when you develop on the flatter portions of a site and maintain tree cover on the hillsides, it's kind of the more preferred way to develop in that by keeping these trees, you minimize stormwater impacts of new development. You avoid grading more of the site where the contours are a little bit steeper. So that's part of the philosophy behind what this means and why it's being proposed as it is. Once again, with a village green policy here and development plan, eventually we would be preserving 332 acres of the 495 acres and developing 162 acres. If you flip that in the county with the zoning applied there, you would be developing about 363 acres and preserving 132, which is mainly the floodplain area. So that's the difference between the two. Admitting a few more folks here. So this is the master plan that matches what you saw on the previous slide as far as the areas being developed. And we have some enlargements. I know this is a pretty small scale, but we'll zoom in a little bit and show you some examples. You can see conservation area with trails through them as part of this developed community. So the goal, once again, is to allow access to the neighborhood commercial over here. Certainly, if somebody chooses, they can hop in their car, but they also can take trails and sidewalks throughout this entire area, across the creek, take a golf cart. And when 96 was constructed, the Smith family basically paid TDOT to install a crossing that is a 10-foot high box culvert right here where you see my cursor right next to that proposed intersection that allows access from the north side to the south side of Highway 96. So a little bit of forward thinking in terms of that is tall enough to allow a golf cart. In fact, you could probably even ride a horse through there if you so chose. So from that standpoint, the interconnectivity has been planned for. We have three villages shown here. The South Village, which would be phase one, the North Village, which would be phase two in the development, and the East Village, which would be phase three of the development. And we'll talk a little bit about infrastructure utilities, but certainly connectivity to the neighborhood commercial with supporting residential to help businesses that would invest here is part of the reasoning behind that, and then the connectivity of the North Village following behind that. Part of the city's thoroughfare plan is to have a north-south connection, basically that aligns with North Chapel up here, take that steep curve out of it, cross over Highway 96, and then eventually connect to the south into North Chapel. And that is what this purple roadway that you see my cursor moving along respects. There is also on the thoroughfare plan an east-west connection of Market Street over here that is one that we would work and provide that. But I think our sensitivity is to try and do that in a way that's reflective of the farmstead. I'll use the term low country feel. Perhaps that's even a wooden trellis bridge like sometimes you see in rural areas. So that's our interest in trying to theme this in a way that is respectful to the heritage of the the farming and the horse barn and such that has taken place over the years when the family has owned the property. So the total residences being proposed, and this would be more the development plan than Envision Franklin. Envision Franklin only allows the concept to come in. The development plan would be the next step. But what we have shared in the application is 1,350 residences on the 500 acres and 15,000 square foot of commercial buried in two little nodes here, more of the coffee shop level that would not include the neighborhood commercial out here at the corner. That's about 2.7 units to the acre if you do the density calculation, which when you have land that is this extensive and has been owned by the family, looking at it from that standpoint, that's a pretty reasonable considering the county zoning allows for 2 units to the acre in this area. So a little bit of history there. Let me move on. So this is the next few sheets. We're going to zoom in on each of those villages. The East Village, you can start to see where the road comes in. We have a roundabout node, and then encircle that with different types of housing, alley-loaded communities with different types of homes from townhomes, some condominiums above, retail a little bit in the pink you see right here, townhomes in red, alley-loaded single-family homes, front garage access single-family homes along the periphery, and walkable. You see the arrows connecting kind of through the center of these homes is walkable connections throughout this community out to the trail system. So if you live in a residence here, you have the ability to walk down a little greenway path and get out and get onto the trail system and take advantage of really the beauty of the site. One thing we like to do is provide some imagery so you get a feel of where our thought process is. Looks like we have one more admission. Relative to, the how architecture relates and the commitment to all of you is that this will be respectful of the farmstead look in terms of materials, in terms of roof lines. You know, I heard one individual use the term agri-hood. That can mean, some community gardens and such, and certainly introduce that. But I think the farmstead history of this is what will drive the architecture in terms of the community. And then as we move further to the south, this is where we were looking a minute ago on the East Village, and this is once again phase 3. We'll talk about this area down here in more detail, which is the farmstead. This is continuing that down a little bit of some live work retail units where a self-proprietor can have a little art gallery or fabric store or whatever they may choose to in these orange units with some residential flats above retail along this little street. So all of that 15,000 square foot of retail that's envisioned is right around this node, right in through here, and then just a little bit in the north community that we'll talk about in a minute. But once again, seeing trails connect into the different areas, so walkability being key. Let's talk about the East Village Farmstead. One of the special considerations that we've asked for with this application is everywhere in the master plan, the proposed new development has been held back behind the TVA easement and towers that kind of bisect this property. It's about 2.5 football fields from the Highway 96 out here back to that TVA line. One of the things that is in front of that area currently is the old horse barn or shed is right here, which is the long structure, if you're familiar with the property. And then there's a dairy barn right here, which has a look similar to this. And one of the things we're proposing is a farmstead style little inn hospitality 76 room boutique, keep the barn, have a little outdoor courtyard, and kind of, South Hall is an image down here with that arrival court, would provide a venue for family reunions. Somebody wanted to have a wedding there or whatever, but a very small boutique venue. And what that lets us do is right up front, and this is still about a football field and a half reserved from Highway 96 out here, but let us set the architecture and kind of have a statement of what this community represents and what it stands for right out here at the gateway in. Elements like porches wrapping around the community, and I think staff has asked for a little more detail. We're working on that with our next resubmittal. The little cottages you see back here, hospitality cottages, a structure similar in kind to that, and renovate the barn and have a little venue that faces the courtyard where, once again, you could rent it for a party, a family reunion, whatever the case may be. Let me admit two more folks. Keeping on going. This is the North Village. So here is Fly Park, North Chapel Road in the Bend. And as we talked about at the larger master plan, the city of Franklin has on their thoroughfare for a north-south collector roadway coming through here. We've met with the engineering staff. This meets their criteria. The one thing we would introduce is a traffic circle for a little bit of traffic calming just to keep speeds reasonable on that. And then work into varied housing types, just like you saw. Each of these communities introduces different types of units so that we have varied price points from single family homes to a townhome. Actually, this is with a walkable gateway that would anchor one of these red elements. So that is kind of showing the connectivity once again out to the trail system, which then goes down to the neighborhood commercial. Connectivity to the school in working with the county is one of the goals we're proposing, as well as I know there's trails throughout Fly Park, but trying to get connectivity through so that Fly Park residents could come over here and have a cup of coffee at a little coffee shop, or these residents could walk over and use the trail system. And then the last village is the Southern Village. So this is one of the neighborhood commercial policied areas right here. It's about 13 acres on the south side, 10 acres on the north side that has that policy already in place. The road system, once again, here is the pedestrian connection below Highway 96, represented by that arrow right there. So the trails would go through there. Park system here, trail system connecting walkability back up to the neighborhood commercial. And one of the proposals is that with this, a need would come to bear for a new eastern fire station. This is about a 2.8 acre parcel right here that would be presented to the city for development of that fire station. So this is the independent living, assisted living component right next to the neighborhood commercial. One of the things that discussions to date, with the city planning staff have been, I think the use is a good one to keep family members close by, but they want the scale of these buildings, kind of the architecture, to be reflective of that farmstead, rural community look. So working through independent cottages with a central, meal facility is kind of the vision for what this represents. But the immediate for one of these type of centers to be successful is about 100 residential units being in that. So that's what this represents with the roadway system being shown here in purple, and then additional housing types, single family residential, townhomes, representing that connectivity along the main spine up to the neighborhood commercial. So one of the questions by many folks we've heard in just the meetings held to date is, um, how do we provide infrastructure out to this area, and who incurs the cost of that? And we put this into the presentation just to help answer that question. So uh, this Smith family development will extend infrastructure sewer. It will have a lift station here with a force main that ties all the way back to current city infrastructure that has capacity for the additional loading. And what that would mean is it opens the area that you see in the darker shade here for future sewer capacity. As a gravity sewer would build out, that would also along the river to the new plant, that would open the southern areas to future sewer capacity. But the one point we want to make is that unless this property, being the largest single land holding in the eastern UGB of the city, participates, it's really difficult to ever have sewer infrastructure extended here. The proposal utilizes a new state law that was passed within the last year and a half for infrastructure development districts. And basically, it allows funding of public infrastructure and construction of that on a bond basis, but does not use any taxpayer money for that purpose. So this will be funded by the development itself and by the developer. The future residents here will have an assessment added to their tax base, and that pays basically for the loan and the cost of this infrastructure. But it can only be public infrastructure by the new state law. And this has been in place in Texas, Florida, California, other states for some period of time now. What it does is allow properties that have infrastructure needs to be able to extend that and find a way to fund that through the bond market at a reasonable interest rate. So we hope that there may be some questions about that, but hope that explains. So this would be the extension of sewer to a lift station right here, force main in the green dash line you see here. And what that does is not only serve the Smith property, but with the extension of future mains, the Smith property would extend those mains to their boundary, would allow sewer service for all of the dark shaded area there. All right, so next steps, just kind of giving a summary here. Staff will review this request and provide their recommendation on June the 18th. There will be a public meeting before the Planning Commission on 6/26 at 7 o'clock in the temporary meeting facilities located in the Williamson County Administrative Complex. And we will be there as well to present it. And with that, questions. I was trying to get it to go there. So I know Stormy's been looking at questions raised to date. I'm going to pull this up here, and once again, by raising a hand that we will see, we can unmute you and allow you to ask a question if you want to do that in person, or you can put it in the chat if that's easier for you or you prefer. So Stormy, questions so far that were typed in?
Yes. Barb had a few questions. We can kind of start with her. She asked earlier, what other properties have the Smith family developed in Williamson County?
Okay. So I've been handed a list here. So Morningside, which is a kind of 55 plus independent living community. I think the family going back to the early days, River Rest off of Hillsborough Pike, Battlewood, Hunterwood, Brentwood Point, Indian Springs, Colony House, The View. So I will mention one additional thing is we are putting together a website that will continue this dialogue and present what you see here this evening with some additional information as far as architectural visioning. Should have that ready within the next couple of weeks here, which will be another resource for everybody to refer to.
Um,
Stormy, another one?
yes. Let's see. Sorry, guys, the chats keep scrolling down. Um, Melissa asks, why not develop this property for what it's zoned for today?
Well, once again, our preference would be to say that is it a better development if you preserve 332 acres and develop 162, or is it a better development if you develop 360 and preserve 160, thereabouts 150? I think the goal is for us to extend sewer and undergo that expense is certainly some additional units are needed to spread that expense out over. And with the village green policy of preserving 70% of the site, I would make the argument that it is a better approach to development of staying off the hills, keeping trees, staying in the meadows, and then restoring the remainder of the site for walkability. So I think that's the answer we would give to that.
Apologize if I get your name wrong. I believe it's Rachidi. He says, or she, how many acres will be deforested?
Deforested basically is mainly tree rows and the area a little bit up toward the north village and the northwest corner of the property. Other than that, all of the forested areas where there are solid stands of woods would remain in the residential. The southern corner of the neighborhood commercial has trees on it currently, and that is about a 13-acre tract of land, but that isn't part of the Envision Franklin request because that area already has the policy needed to develop that. So as far as new areas being deforested, very little. I would throw out 10 acres to 15 acres at most.
Ned says, love the pedestrian trail. It's already thought about. A 5-lane highway is extremely dangerous to cross on foot or bike and would mean everyone is having to drive without it.
Well, once again, the crossing is underground. There is a box culvert 10 foot in height that allows those trails to go beneath the highway and provide connectivity over to the commercial site. Um, so there is no crossing the highway. Now, I will also say with this proposal, as you get down the road to development plan, there will be traffic studies required, and we fully anticipate the development funding a new signal at North Chapel Road and at least one or two additional signals based upon what the traffic study were to say. So there would be the ability down the road to cross at those intersections. However, what we're counting on is utilizing the pedestrian crossing that goes beneath the highway for anybody that, wants to walk the trails, drive a golf cart, etc.
Melissa says, could you explain the purchase price of the homes or duplexes? Do these prices align with the average median income of Williamson County?
Yeah, I think the variation in that pricing strategy is one of the assets. So, you know, part of the goal here is with multiple housing types is to have starter entry homes, small cottages, townhomes, or even if a flat for a individual that might want to live above the little commercial at a price point that's at the very much the lower end, 350,000 to right in that range, even 300 for some of the smaller flats. The larger single-family homes that back up to the preserved natural areas are ones that are going to be your highest price point of the range of housing. So a little bit of, somebody looking for their first home investment could afford to live here, as well as the next level up or the level up after that when you have quite a few kids and need more space and bonus rooms and such. So, and then as we talked about, more of that ability to have multi-generational housing and accommodate somebody that doesn't want the space and a home and the maintenance anymore, but loves living in this community, is close to family and friends, and wants to seek the option of independent or assisted living.
Barb has two comments here. She mentioned that you talked about the units per acre for the housing.
Yes.
She said that the plan calls for 2.7 units per acre, and that's not far from what the county calls for 2 homes per acre. But then you say earlier the county zoning for that area one home per acre. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, the minimum lot size in the county is a 1 acre lot. However, they allow for the minimum lot size that's mentioned is basically a half acre. So through conservation subdivisions and some of the other options available in the county, that's how you can look at developing. But basically, the density that is allowed is that 1 per acre is what the county would be looking at. So on 500 acres, you can basically say the total acreage at 1 per acre, a maximum of 500. I don't know that you would be able to get to that point, but that's what the total acreage would allow.
Dwayne says on the south side development, my property slash family property is surrounded by and directly affected by the zoning decision. What does this decision mean for us?
Well, the south side, I'm assuming he would mean south of kind of where that South Village is. And a couple things I guess I would offer, and this is one of the things that the Envision Franklin Amendment asks for is what are you providing to the community? What benefits are you providing? One, I would argue, is maintaining 70% of this farm in its natural state with public trail systems, which is what this would be. I know that the park department, Kevin Lindsay and the staff have reached out to have conversations about, you know, would part of this be even public parks or would it be maintained by the HOA? I think those are all discussions. So this would be an asset for anybody that wants to enjoy the open space there. Secondly is the sewer, the extension of sewer out to this area. While south of the site, and depending upon how far south, wouldn't be accommodated by this initial step unless it can feed via gravity up to the lift station. The the ability to connect to sewer, depending upon the size of your lot and such, it is one thing that over time is an asset. I think the city of Franklin staff have stated, septic systems are basically the norm for developing in Williamson County. And septic systems, depending upon the soil types, can have a life anywhere from 25 years to, gosh, there's some that, are still going at 70 years and 80 years. You don't know when those fail. The grassland area went through a period where, some of those subdivisions developed back in the 1950s and 60s, starting having issues with their septic fields. And that's a tough position to find yourself in if there isn't an alternative. So the city of Franklin, by coming in with annexation, is basically the ability to have sanitary sewer service provided. Certainly, there's cost to that, but that is the advantage. With sewer being out there, nobody has to tie on at that point. Once again, the proposal is we're making accommodations for that future extension. But it can be something that's very good to have as homes age. And I know we have a wide variety of the age of properties out this way. So it's an asset that you may not appreciate today, but can appreciate in another 5, 10, 20 years if you find yourself in the situation of kind of what the Grassland community found itself in.
Melissa and a few other people I'm noticing are concerned about flooding. She says how much dirt is going to be brought into to build up the land for this proposal. Every subdivision round has been building up the height of the lots. Are you going to be doing this too? What are the impacts to flooding along Maze Creek?
Good question. We are not adjusting the floodplain of Maze Creek in any way with this proposal. So we are respecting that, and I can go back to the master plan here, but the limit of the current 100-year floodplain will be respected with the development. And that's another asset of preserving 70% of the site is if your goal is to fit 1 acre lots onto the entirety of this property that can be developed, you're going to try and develop every square inch. Wherein with Village Green, preserving 70% of the site, you can pick and choose the areas that you want to see development in. So therefore, the floodplain is remaining totally untouched. We're not bringing in any fill material to offset that in any way.
Okay. I apologize for getting through these guys. There's a lot of questions, so I'm kind of going mostly in
Yep.
order. Let's see, with 1,300 plus new residents in a concentrated area, how many new schools will be needed for elementary, middle, and high school due to the additional students and relocation of students from existing schools? And what will the cost be to the county?
And that is a question, of course, to offset those costs. I know there was quite a bit of construction just done with Page High School and the middle school, expanding that. Trinity has been at capacity, but this is one of the areas that while there is additional need and builds up over time, there will be taxes offsetting that to the tune of both fees on the front end with the development and property taxes. So, I can't tell you the number. I mean, we can have those conversations going forward. That is a discussion to be had, probably more at the development plan. But you're looking at this being a 10 to 20 year build out. This is not there's 1,350 homes here tomorrow. That's a number at 20 years into the future. So while fees and taxes start to begin being collected at the point that these lots are platted by phase, it allows time for those facilities to be put into place.
Rick asks, will Watkins Creek neighborhood remain in the county?
Uh, We don't control that. So, what we're proposing here doesn't impact those residents in any way, shape, or form. Um,
Let's see. Kathy wants some more details on the total acreages for the South Village, North Village, open space. They're just kind of asking for some more details on that. Do you have that available?
I don't, but I'll tell you what, this is being recorded and we're taking note of your questions. So we can provide that, come up with, exact development acreage on each of those and post that uh, on the website.
Elizabeth asks, how is this plan different from the one proposed and vehemently opposed 5 to 6 years ago?
The one 6 years ago did not preserve 70% of the site. In fact, that tool didn't even exist back then. That was a new tool that was put into effect with the Envision Franklin update. So more of the site was proposed for development back then. The village green policy is brand new with this latest update. And I think the city leadership and planners spent time looking at some other communities, Serenbe down to the west of Atlanta being one, that have kind of gone this route, and kind of the quality of what that looks like on the ground. Um, the other thing from what was proposed back in 2018 is Highway 96 was a vision. The state had committed to funding, but nothing was built or in the ground at that point. Now we have a four-lane median divided highway to address the traffic, and certainly this proposal wouldn't be, appropriate on a two-lane road. And then the third one is the infrastructure development district that the state approved within the past year. Um, and the state's motivation is to, as need for housing, is a national need. It's not something just um, native to Nashville and Franklin and Williamson County. It is across the state of Tennessee. It's across our nation. Um, it's one to get more folks into positions where they can afford housing. The IDD law basically allows properties that have more infrastructure expense a means to be able to accommodate that and make those improvements. So that is the tool being used to allow this community to develop cost effectively, and bring, the sewer extension, water improvements, transportation improvements to signals, anything that's public improvements within that budget.
Okay, I'm trying to look through these to see if I can combine some questions. Barb brings up something that a few people brought up, which is why multifamily that crowds the area? Why not just single family homes? I think a few people are concerned about high density in smaller areas.
Okay, well, let me offer, multifamily can mean a couple different things. From a definition, a townhome or even single family homes that don't have subdivided lots can be deemed multifamily, or multifamily can be apartments and, longer buildings. None of apartments nor longer, larger buildings that house 3 stories and such is proposed here. Um, all of the structures would be 2-story unless it is either residential over a commercial use, which is allowed in the neighborhood commercial, and in the areas where we have retail on the first floor, kind of the little shop experience, and then with 2 floors of residential above that, or the boutique inn would also be 3 stories. Those are the only applications. Other than that, uh, it would be, there isn't any multifamily in the sense that you think of it, um, other than townhomes. I will include that in there, or some attached flats with the commercial associated with it. So it looks like most of you are, um, I don't see folks raising their hands, Stormy, unless you're seeing that.
I do
Uh,
not.
yeah, I don't either. So if you want to ask a question in person, or if you like putting it in the chat, we can keep going this way. But certainly offer that, because I'll let anybody that wants to ask it out loud. I can bring you on here and you can ask that question. Um, so keep going until we see some hands raised. There's a little icon as far as raising your hand, and it'll put a little yellow hand in place and we can see that. Stormy?
Yes. Elizabeth asked, who incurs the maintenance cost of the trails, etc.?
The HOA would incur that cost unless the City of Franklin Parks were to take those over. And that's a discussion to be had still going forward.
KDD says, how would you deal with a hotel right next to Trinity Elementary? Doesn't that propose a risk to our kids? How would people cross the elementary school property to get to your walking trails, etc.? This is a
So,
terrible overcrowding of our rural area.
so the trail that would connect over there would run along the southern edge of Fly Park, which is owned by the county and could be used to connect over there. Once again, those are goals that we think would make for a better community if you can walk your kids to that local school. And that's the reason for that proposal. So that's how it would connect. The boutique hotel is at the opposite end on the opposite side of the creek from Trinity Elementary. So it's all the way in the phase 3 portion over to the east of the creek, probably, well in excess of 3/4 of a mile, not even a mile away.
Kathy asks, can we expect an independent environmental impact study for the floodplain and flooding surrounding the community?
Yes. So as part of the development plan application, you have to look at a couple things and submit those into the city staff. Jurisdictional determination, which we already are providing buffers on any of the drainage ways, assuming they would be creeks, and we want to do that from a standpoint of good stewardship anyway. Environmental assessment is kind of a different tool, which basically is looking at the property from are there any archaeological aspects or are there any wetlands, et cetera. That will also be done as part of that, but we are totally staying out of the floodplain, so we would not be impacting any wetland areas along the creek that may come up. So.
Okay. Would the taxes that people would pay for schooling, that money would go to the city and not go to the county schools, correct?
No, the county, the only city district is the Franklin Special School District. Otherwise, taxes go to support the county school system. This would not be in the Franklin Special School District uh, district. So therefore, the taxes would go to the county.
Kathy brings up your South Village map has a lift station and a floodplain. Are pump stations allowed to be built on a floodplain?
You have to work through the electrical and all those aspects of it, but that is where the sewer runs. So we would have an access out to that point that would stay above the 100-year floodplain.
Kathy asks, on the South Village plan, you have proposed retirement facility, fire station, high density housing, commercial, and a lift station. How does this affect traffic on North Chapel Road, which is hilly, and Blindside Narrow Road?
Well, part of that would be as far as accessing Highway 96. I think this development would certainly be providing a light at that intersection. And then with the kind of hill as immediately as you go south on North Chapel from 96, it climbs in grade a little bit there, but improvements to that road would be part of this as well, including widening turn lanes, etc. Um, so all of that would be addressed, the specifics in the traffic study, but I think North Chapel Road, yeah, you'd basically be rebuilding that road across the South Village frontage.
Jack says the 70% is a red herring and avoids the real reason we do not want Village Green. You avoid the impact of high density housing, mixed and commercial use property having our rural community. traffic, schools, urban communities, sewer, crime, etc. That is the elephant in the room. Why not 70% in rural reserve? That is a compromise for all of us who want to keep our rural community. Not speaking to everyone, but maybe an idea can be brought forward. Also, you cannot build 495 houses because of the floodplains. How many houses can you build with the current rural reserve?
I think there's a lot packed into that, but I think the one thing to be said is I think uh, if this remains as a rural reserve policy, I think the Smith family would have to reconsider whether being in the city is, part of the best interest. The amount of homes is what helps to pay for the sewer and the other infrastructure and traffic lights and rebuilding roadways. Cities, and this is true wherever in a municipal community, cities have tough times devoting funds, and many times those types of improvements are needed to be made by developers. So, um, you know, I respect everybody's opinion in terms of that, but I think anytime you reserve 70% of a site as natural and you're at 2.7 units to the acre, that is not high density housing. Um, so that's the contrary opinion, for what it's worth.
Elizabeth asked, will these trails be open to the public?
Yes.
Where will additional parking be if that's the case?
And at each of those nodes throughout you saw them connecting into all three villages. There will be small parking lots, small on-street parking provided in those areas. So, they're there for the residents, but certainly if somebody from the community wants to come walk, because I mean, it's you add it all up, it's probably several miles of trails easily. That's something that we will accommodate at the development plan stage.
Kathy asks, when will the recording be available for viewing? She's having some connection issues.
The city is going to post it on there, and I had it on that one slide. They'll post it on their, I forget what they call their website, but I would think within a couple days. And then I'm also recording this, so if anybody wants to reach out, we can provide that file as well. But I know Joel Aguilera is kind of directing this case for city planning, and I would say within a day or two at most, that'll be on that website.
Melissa asked, will there be stoplights added to Highway 96 at North Chapel?
Yes. I mean, once again, that a traffic study has to be done. That has to be approved by the city. But our assumption is, and I think absolutely, given the nature of that road, that would have a traffic light along with, as I mentioned earlier, an additional one or two traffic signals. The collector roadway that's on the city's thoroughfare plan would be another candidate, which is where, goes up through the North Village and realigns with North Chapel, kind of takes the curve, sharp 90-degree curve out of it, and provides a new access down to 96. And then whether the eastern roadway merited a traffic signal would also have to be looked at in the study. But yes, traffic signals are part of the plan.
Barb asks, a concern I have is related to the county schools. If this is annexed into the city, they get the taxes benefit, but yet they would not be responsible for paying for the impact on the county schools.
Yeah, I
How
think
can
we
this,
answered that before.
okay.
The taxes go to the county for the
Um,
schools.
I think that kind of concisely gets almost all the questions. I think there's a few people that had more comments that I might have missed.
Yeah,
Um,
raise your hand if you have anything further that you want us to address, or type it in the chat and we'll keep going. But we're at 10 after 6. I know we're going to wrap up at 6. I think, let's target 6:15. I think that's the limit I set in the Zoom meeting anyway. So it may actually boot us off at 6:15. But um, yeah, do you have anybody that wants to speak up verbally, even if you don't want to I guess it's tough to know that if you don't raise your hand or type it in the chat, but we can turn the mic on and let you offer a comment.
You can also type in chat if you'd like to be unmuted.
Yep. Stormy, you seeing anything?
Let me comb through these one more time to see if I missed anything. Barb asks, what would the actual number of homes per actual acreage be?
Per actual, so 2.7 is the answer to that. When you look at density for any of the city, when a development plan goes through, it's the amount of homes over that land area. So 2.7 is the answer over the entirety of the property. Um, each of the little villages is going to have different types of homes, but you wouldn't look at it as a village. And then around each of those villages is preserved areas where there's large expanse of open space. Might help for me to go back and share that plan one more time, but uh, so hopefully that answers that.
She clarified 2.7, then is it counting the 500 acres?
Yeah, it's actually 495 plus or minus, but yes.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Because otherwise, we're a couple minutes away, probably from the Zoom meeting.
Cynthia asks, how would it compare to McKay's Mill area? To
Not nearly.
clarify, we are the three properties on 96 Highway surrounded by the South Village development. So my question is, what are my choices regarding zoning being as the development joins my property on three of the four sides?
Well, not nearly as dense or fully developed as McKay's Mill. Um, McKay's Mill, I don't know what the density, but I would guess is at least probably in the neighborhood overall as an average of 5 or 6 units to the acre, maybe 4.5, but not any lower than that. And we're at 2.7. So hopefully that, just looking, and I reshared the master plan here, you can see the extent of natural area being preserved, nothing like this. The homes with fences out at the front, streetscape, I think they certainly didn't do the farmstead theming of the architecture and such. This would be more that rural farmstead, low country, whatever you want to call it. You saw some of the imagery, but to the visual eye, if you see my cursor, this distance from where my cursor is right there out to here is 700 feet. That's close to 2.5 football fields. Um, McKay's Mill, it's different. It's night and day different. This is that TVA easement. So you can see that if you drive by the site as a landmark, all of our development is back behind that TVA line you see there, with the exception of this little farmstead, boutique inn right here. And that would be set aside. This is the hilltop as you come over the hill right here. You don't even see this unless you're coming this way. This is being preserved as a hilltop with trees on it. So that would be kind of the first thing, setting kind of a theme for the overall community as you enter. And that's phase 3. So that's, you're looking, gosh, 15 years down the road, probably making it over here. This would be phases 1 and phase 2.
The last one I kind of see on chat is Marty says, I believe extending sewer to this development will improve the whole community.
Okay. More of a statement than a question, but
Yes.
all right. Well, folks, I will say we appreciate your interest. And I know this is a long process. I think what's being proposed on face value is unique. The city established this land use policy just recently. Harlansdale sought it for one of their most recent plan approvals that went through Planning Commission. But this is new, and you really can't set aside 70% of your area unless you have some unique features. So it's a tool that I credit the city for coming up with this latest Envision Franklin Plan Amendment. And I think it can really do a special community here out in this area. So, with that having been said, we'll let everybody have a good night. Once again, the city will provide the recording. We have a website being established which will let you ask questions and see additional information. And then the next time city report will come out on June the 18th, and June the 26th is the Planning Commission meeting. So if you have any more questions, Catalyst Design Group, you can reach out to me there. Feel free. Folks, thank you, and everybody have a good evening.